everyone, and welcome to podcast number 8. And today we're going to talk about inflation. So, how are you today, Jan?
Doing fantastic. Yep, looking forward to let's try and unbundle this and share. I don't think we're gonna. I think it's about fun to explore it and see what we can discover in this conversation.
Mm-hmm. So, what I had in my mind yesterday, I was watching the news from Mauritius, and there was this guy in the parliament. He brought some vegetables to the parliament, and he was saying, I bought these tomatoes when it was about 12 to 13 ringgit, and I got this brinjal for about 12 ringgit. And he's saying a week worth of vegetable is coming up to 100 ringgit in Mauritius, and that's like really high for people in Mauritius to afford. And I pay like about 20 ringgit for a week's worth of vegetable. So from a consumer perspective, what I'm seeing is, okay, Mauritius is one example. And a few weeks ago, we were talking about UK. Remember, you were saying the electricity price is going up. And also yesterday, we talked about how the Malaysian interest rate is going up as well. So now I'm in this stage. Should I save? Should I be very? Should I be worried about spending money and stuff like that? But that's a consumer perspective, right? When we look at organization, when they are seeing when they are facing the inflation, should they step back, save, or should they double down on innovation and go forward and push on more innovation programs or purchases?
Yeah, tough question because there's so many variables, and it's a question of the assumed context, I think. So I think one thing I would do is to step back and draw on the knowledge that I gained from studying economics at university. And the basic idea behind inflation is if you print more money and you don't necessarily produce more value, the prices will rise. And this creates a feedback loop if it runs out of control, where everything becomes more expensive. Why? Because everything is becoming more expensive. And it kind of becomes and then when you have the real danger there is when you have runaway inflation or even hyperinflation, where, for example, in Germany, one of the reasons why the Nazis came to power is because Germany one of the consequences of the 1929 depression in America was it triggered a deep recession in Germany, depression really. And to answer that, the German government printed lots of money, but that in turn triggered hyperinflation. And there are stories, for example, of buying a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow of cash. And you buy the wheelbarrow and the cash in the morning because the next day it would require 2 wheelbarrows of cash. Right. So it's not like a little bit more, it's like, and this is obviously a very extreme situation, but it is, or people not buying wallpaper anymore and just wallpapering their house with money because it was cheaper, right? So you have these kind of crazy situations that have occurred in the past. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen now, but what I am saying is that the possibility of something like this happening is become more. And I think what we should recognize from a corporate perspective and also from an individual perspective is that it does seem that we're going into a structurally different age. So the last 10 years in particular have been characterized by what can be called loose money policy, which is print lots of money, keep your interest rates low. So that means for normal people, you can take loans that are pretty cheap. If you're companies, you can borrow lots of money cheaply. And that's good. Now, the decline, the downside of that is that if you're a saver and you have an interest rate account, you're not going to earn a lot of interest on it, right? And so because the thing with the interest rates is they affect the people who are taking the loans and also who are earning the savings, right? So as interest rates go up, it's good because for the savers, because they'll earn more money. If you have $100 in the account and interest rates go up to, for example, 5%, then you would earn $5 on that, not, for example, if it was 1%, $1. But equally, if you've taken out a loan, you will now need to pay 5% on that loan, not 1%. So whereas you'd plan to pay $1 for your loan, you now need to pay $5 for your loan. And if you're talking about hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, that all adds up very, very quickly. And so I think the thing to recognize is that certainly the last decade has been quite characterized by loose monetary policy. And there's questions of whether we're actually maybe in a bigger transition of maybe the last 40, 50 years. So I think the overall thing that I would suggest is to consider that we're entering into a very structurally different time. It's not, the old rules will keep applying. So I think a lot of the challenge right now is to, first of all, make sure you, like we were just saying, don't die. Because a lot of corporations today are borrowing money at very low rates to fund things that aren't actually making a lot of difference. A McKinsey study I looked at last year was saying that the average corporation, for every $1 you give it, only creates 95 cents of value, something like that. So that means the average corporation is just destroying money. And the way they fund themselves is by borrowing more money. And why does that work? Because money is so cheap that you can just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and then you just keep pushing the future into the future, so to say. I mean, this is exactly what's happened to Chinese developers, right? The Evergrande and co, who have just borrowed excessively. And now that the interest rates are going to go up, these guys are completely, they're in a lot of trouble irreversibly. They're not going to be able to fix this situation. It just doesn't seem possible that Evergrande will find a way to pay back $300 billion of debt. It's just doesn't seem to be a realistic conversation to have. So I think in the sense of a corporate governance perspective, the first thing to consider is how to survive from a basic level with your business model, with your current cost structures, in an environment of increasing interest rates. I think that's really the most important thing, secure the fact that you don't die. And then branching off of that is what kind of opportunities might come out of that.
Yeah, I lost track of what I was supposed to ask. Okay, so what would you say? I mean, I know you have said to step back and try not to take loan and to spend it on things that are not relevant for organizations, right? But what advice would you give to a startup, or even to an organization that's not taking money from anyone, but they are running their day-to-day operations and they will want to at least sort of achieve their goals despite having an inflation going on? So what would be their course of action that you would recommend to them?
So, I mean, just to be clear, my guidance is more specifically to fundamentally reassess your beliefs around what you think the money reality is. Because the belief that you will keep being able to access lots of money at very low interest rates is come to an end. That is no longer viable. And you need to be planning for an environment where interest rates are going up and also inflation going up, so potentially a stagflation environment. With regards to how to respond to that, I mean, I've invested recently in a company that are looking to do an IPO soon, and you probably couldn't find a worse time to do an IPO in the last 10 years, 15 years than this year, right? So challenging, but I think it's a fantastic business. And I think that what is coming is a culling, basically. And the culling is about weeding out the business models that don't really work. And it's a survival of the fittest kind of moment. So it's about focusing on fitness and adaptivity and making sure that you are creating true value that is real and sustainable. Now, what's happened a lot in the sort of the tech culture of today is these sort of the massive hype and the expectations of these ridiculous curves where everything just goes exponential, and every graph you see of every startup shows a curve going up. Our users are going up, engagement's going up, revenue's growing up. But whether there's any truth in those charts is another matter. And so it's about coming back down to earth again if you're running your own startup or running any kind of organization, and coming back to truth, which we covered a lot in the last podcast, and just being able to say, what is actually the truth of our organization? And we have to move beyond the bullshit and the politics, because if you get too trapped in that, there is no way you will make it through this situation. And so I think the businesses that have a good chance of navigating through this very avocat environment, and the businesses that will indeed thrive in this avocat environment, will be able to draw on truth, which means they understand that their business model may have weaknesses, and they address those weaknesses. They understand where they're bleeding costs, and they cut those costs quickly. They understand where there's opportunities for revenue, and they move into those environments quickly. And so that's going to require much sharper agility to move quickly and respond, because you're not going to be able to predict it all. It's impossible. So instead, it's about being awake, paying attention, and responding to the challenges and threats as they emerge, But again, I think I would also be careful about going too big. I think there's this sort of idea of go big or go home, right? If you're not thinking, aim for the stars and you might reach the sky. And of course, that's always laudable, and I celebrate that. But at the right way, at the right time. If we're going into a potentially recession, if we are going to an environment where markets are crashing and everything's falling apart, is that really the right time to go for those things? Well, everyone needs to make their own judgment about it, but understand you should make your judgment about it and not just get carried away with whatever you think the market should be doing. So I think it's shifting into this mode of really paying attention to what's going on, avoiding the hype, cutting through to the heart of the matter and things, and having the real conversations, and then quickly responding to it.
Okay, and thank you for those advices. I hope our viewers can learn something from here. Definitely I am, in terms of moving quickly and going into where you can make money and then cutting down unnecessary cost. So when we are talking about moving quickly, right, that reminds me of crypto. And right now when I'm looking at the headlines, as you said earlier, there's an apocalypse going on. And if you look at one of the headlines, it says that this crypto billionaire, the fortunes of destroyed in weeks. I think they're talking about Coinbase CEO, his fortune went down by 82%. And there's also this headline I'm reading, which is Terra goes from DeFi darling to death spiral. And crypto is feeling the heat. Here's what you should know. So lots of things going on. And why would you say it's happening? And what do you think is going to happen in a couple of weeks?
Well, the play between the bulls and the bears in the markets, right? The bulls trying to push the prices up, the bears trying to bring the prices down, is a search for truth. What is the real price of a Bitcoin? I don't know. But right now, if you go in the market, something just under 30K, right? I think last time I checked. So 6 months ago, it might have been 60K. 6 years ago, it might have been $500. So going back to, again, what we said in the last podcast, it's important to understand that there is, in Industry 4.0, no truth, in my opinion. There are just perspectives at truth, snapshots of truth at certain moments of time. And so what is the true price of a Bitcoin? It depends on what time you're looking at and with what expectations you're looking into the future. So, for example, the fortune of this, of the Coinbase CEO, was that large number that he had in the first, was that ever really real? Maybe, but probably not, right? And so there's a truthiness to it, right? Because you can add up maybe his shares or his holdings and then give him a certain number, right? Let's say if he's 82%, he's on 2, so it's probably around about 80 billion, something like that, right? And now it's just 2 billion, right? And so, but it's also worth noting that 10 years ago, he probably didn't have even 2 billion. And so I think we're really much more useful to understand this truth journey. And especially, I think, what's happening in the crypto markets, because it's such a new class of asset value storage, whatever you want to call it, right? That it's in discovery mode about where its truths lie. And it's likely that it will continue this sort of volatile journey. So I think the main point here is to not get too caught up in any one story, but note the stories, right? But not get caught up in them, step back and see what's the bigger narrative here. And we were commenting, I think, yesterday, Hannah, where we were noticing the point is you did some great research, right? You were looking at the different websites of different media sources and noting that everywhere everyone's talking about crypto. And so that didn't happen, let's say, even 5 years ago, probably didn't even happen 3 years ago. And so against this backdrop of the volatility is the normalization of crypto itself. So if we continue to examine the idea that we believe in the principles of crypto, then I think it's more about that idea of buying and holding, and that's the strategy that I personally take. I'm not here to make the quick wins or losses. I have a 5-year horizon, and I invest accordingly. Now, that being said, of course, it's difficult, right? Because it goes up, it goes down. But then let's also look at Netflix share price. That's also collapsed, I think, 70%. Look at the Meta share price. Many others, look at where the NASDAQ is dropping down 15-20%. So before, the accusation was always against crypto that it's the most volatile area and you can't trust it because it's so volatile. But if we have a look at what these other major tech companies were meant to be, we're also seeing Bitcoin-like volatility within their stock price, right? So I think what we're overall seeing, and a really good friend of mine, John Lynn, runs a high-frequency trading company called Grasshopper, and he'd been commenting how for the last decade, there's been very relatively historically very low volatility in the markets. So high frequency trading relies on a lot of volatility, and that's where you're doing that. But the last 10 years have been, or last 5 years at least, have been pretty difficult because there's been no volatility really to work with. Everything's been very solid, really. And now volatility is back for a whole variety of reasons. And so I think it's that there's a new game in town. And so being able to, in my mind, I wonder if this analogy works. It's a bit like the real point about climate change is not simply that the climate is changing, it's that there's more energy in the Earth system. So what this means is we're heating the environment up. And because there's more heat, there's more energy. And because there's more energy, you're going to have more storms. You're going to have stronger storms, right? You're going to have stronger rains. You're going to have stronger winds. Everything just has more energy in it. And I wonder if we've had something similar in the financial system where we've added so much money, right? I think that there's some like ludicrous numbers where we printed, certainly the United States has printed more money, I think, in the last couple of years than it did in the entire 20th century, right? It's not like a little bit more, it's mega amounts of cash. And all this cash is like sloshing around the system, but it doesn't really know where to go and what to do. And so it's creating this sort of, what would be climate change in financial terms? It'd be like finance change. I don't know, but like that's not the right way of capturing it, right? Maybe you can think of something smarter there. But I think it can be a useful way to think about it, that we are entering this structurally different time. And so that means in the same way that when we think about climate change, it's not a bit more rain, right? It's, for example, here in Malaysia, we have had to recognize that going forward, we're probably going to get flooded every year. And it's only going to get worse and worse and worse, right? And it's not a one-off, once in 100-year rain. You don't have 1 in 100-year rains every year, right? That doesn't make any sense. So in the same way, in the financial system, we are going into a structurally different time. And I think reorganizing our belief around what money is, how money is working, where stability lies is really important. Now, again, it's not about having an answer there. I think it's about being engaged with the conversation and figuring things out. But most importantly, it's about being open to challenges, our biases and beliefs, and letting them flex and change as the world changes.
All right, Jan. Thank you for sharing. So just a quick summary on what we've talked about. We've talked about inflation and what an organization should do in terms of cutting down unnecessary costs and being quickly moving into things that bring revenue. So thank you so much for your time, Jan, and we hope to see you in our next podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think final point to make here is that businesses born in this time who really double down are going to do very well when the good times return. Being built in environments where it's difficult and challenging and it ain't easy gives you a toughness, a hardness, a realness,
resilience,
that serve you well. Yeah, resilience, exactly. So yeah. I think there's a powerful message in that yes, it is scary and difficult, and there's a lot of volatility in AppleCat, right? But it's also an invitation to greatness. And I think we're defined by the challenge we set ourselves. The greater the challenge, the greater the opportunity to grow. And so now we have a great challenge, and it's up to us as what I would say leadapreneurs to embrace this challenge and actually work with it to build an even better world. And I think we will achieve that.
That's right. So to building a better world, see you all next week. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Leadapreneurs YouTube channel to get your weekly updates.